Welcome to TAC Team Tune-Up, where we look at training and curriculum development for law enforcement professionals. Now, this could be in a recruit setting, in an academy setting, that's preparing for the occupation, or this could be working with incumbents. How do we continue to drive the aspect of longevity of health? How do we keep you healthy? How do we help you thrive in your career, but then also be able to have a healthy and long retirement? So today we're going to be talking about more on the cadet side, right? More on the preparation side within the academy setting, within the recruit setting. Typically, it's common to have some sort of entry test. Now, whether it is pass or fail, whether there is a cutoff score, whether there is some kind of aspect of you have to pass this score for entrance into the academy. Some academies maybe not so much. I know if you're one of the recruits or cadets that I work with or have talked to, in many of those academies, it's more of, hey, this is a test to just be aware of, to be involved, to participate, but just understand how this carries over or correlates to performance in the field. And other academies, and we're joined by Anthony Fullum, that I'll let him introduce himself here in a second. He'll talk about more on that entrance side where some of his involvement has been a pass and fail. And you need to pass to be able to sustain entrance into that space. So no matter which direction you go, it's just great to have some sort of built up mentality of how to approach that test. How do you approach physical ability testing? How do you approach these different formats, right? Whether it's fitness assessments or physical ability testing, how do we approach those? And what is our mentality like going in? So welcome, Anthony Fullum, to TAC Team Tune-Up. If you would share a little bit about yourself, he's done a lot of great things. Only so much, right? We can only talk about so much, but share what you will, share some of the things you've done, and then we'll dive into this episode.
All right. I appreciate it, man. So yeah, I've been in a strength and conditioning coach for about a little over 7 years now in many different spaces, mainly in the tactical space. So I've been with military law enforcement mainly, and I've worked with a few firefighters in terms of more on the personal side, as opposed to the group sides of things. So mainly work with law enforcement, military, and those things of that nature. So mainly with the physical abilities tests that a lot of tactical populations have, whether it's the ACFT for the military, whether it's a PAT for law enforcement, or CPAT for firefighters, there are some commonalities with them as well as a few differences, but generally there are certain things that you can prepare for, whether it's buddy drag, push-ups, running stairs. These common things are kind of across the board. So, I mean, one of the biggest things that will help anyone with any of those tests is really being great at moving your own body, whether that's push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, running, sprinting, any of those things, going back and forth, whether you're doing something with agility, like an Illinois agility test. I know they throw those in there sometimes. But being able to be really good at moving your own body. So if you have no equipment available to you when you're training or anything like that nature, it's cool. It works. You can still do a very good job on these tests. I know that with different genders or different training ages, there's different people are good at different things and a little bit worse at others. That's a little bit more about genetics, physiology, all that stuff. However, you can still improve all of these aspects, right? So just kind of going a little bit of a spiel into getting to that preparation stage, we can start off with one of the main things that's probably in every single test, which is a push-up or some type of long distance run. Like, you're going to get those two pretty much across the board, right? So if we look at push-ups, that can change between, it could be 10 push-ups, 20 push-ups, 30 push-ups in a minute, whatever have you. Starting off trying to get to flat push-ups, like push-ups on the ground, is going to be your saving grace, being good at that. I know that some people can only right now practice with push-ups on their knees or incline push-ups or things of that nature, but being able to, first step, I would say, get to the ground, flat push-ups, all the way down, all the way up, break 90 degrees in the elbows. These are standards that pretty much go across the board. Ways to do that is progression overload, just trying to, even if you can, let's say that someone can only do, let's say, 5 flat push-ups, perfect push-ups, and then their test needs to be 10. Okay, we can start off with 5, get good at 5, and then get to that 10 by either going your knees or doing an incline and continuing to progress. Maybe you can do 6 next week, or maybe you can do 6 in a month, or set, whatever it may be. Just continue to progress and continue to understand that consistency and progression is going to help you get to that final number that you need to get to.
Well,
right.
Even with like that progression and regression piece, right? And diving in, really kind of honing in on that aspect of being able to move our body through space, and looking at, and there's so many different segments to this, but let's say first, understanding that if we're doing a physical ability test, and in many cases, it's challenging our ability to do these tasks that relate to the job. All of these tasks are going to have you moving around, either manipulating your body or manipulating an object while you're manipulating your body. So like you said, being familiar with, let's get good at us first before we start like drifting over toward equipment. Like, how am I going to do a dummy drag if I can't literally be able to sustain a posture? How am I able to throw a ladder? How am I able to, and when you're talking about on the fire side, let's hone in. Let me get my mentality right, specifically on the law enforcement side, right? Let's say trying to get over a barrier. Let's say going through a sprint. Let's say some kind of victim rescue, right? All of these take manipulating our body first before we need to manipulate something else. Same thing. So I'll talk a little bit about our physical ability test, right? Where you have to do like serpentine, you're going around cones. Well, if you can't just sustain balance, if you can't sustain balance on one leg, how are you supposed to maneuver and balance and change direction and all this different agility, right? So like the aspect of manipulate, or be able to manipulate your body first before manipulating an object. Also, I want you to kind of tie in with this the aspect of building up ourself versus training specifically for, if I told you you need to pass this test in 5 minutes, let's say realistically, what are you going to do? You're going to strive for passing that test in 5 minutes, right? But what should the mentality, what should the approach be when approaching tests like this?
So the approach in my mind should be looking past the test, right? There are aspects of the test that you need to be good at, not only to pass, but to be ready for the job requirements for what you're doing on duty. So push-ups is a muscular strength or muscular endurance aspect, right? You're gonna need to push things. You're gonna need to be able to stop any suspects, or grappling, wrestling, any of those things. So having that muscular strength and upper body strength is important for those things, right? If we're running up and down stairs, for example, that's going to take a lot of anaerobic capacity, right? And as well as a little bit of lower body strength, because you're going into knee flexion and pushing off, kind of like a single leg squat over and over and over again, or a sprint or a heavy sprint up and down stairs constantly. And it's not easy. No, I've always said this, no matter how in shape you are, nobody's ready for stairs. Stairs are real difficult.
Doing it fast, right? That's a whole nother word.
So preparing for that is in and of itself, not just preparing for this test, for these 3 flights of stairs. There may be a time you have to go up 10 flights of stairs, right? And then at the end of those 10 flights of stairs, you got to do something, whether it's stop a suspect, chase somebody, whether it's helping somebody down those stairs after you get up those stairs, right?
And sorry to interrupt, but really quick too, and adding this layer, let's say we're talking to recruits, and hopefully recruits understand this. This isn't just in a t-shirt and shorts, right? Maybe testing wise, but depending on your operational group, you're either in full kit or you're in even advanced, right? Like your squat, you're going into a heavier type of environment, so even more added to your kit. And so it's having the strength, like you said, do you even have the strength for an additional 40, 50, 60 pounds on your body distributed in a very awkward manner? And then, okay, you're either clearing in a very rhythmic, smooth manner, or depending on the situation, you are sprinting up those stairs. So you have to be able to, again, go back to maneuver yourself, but then now you're manipulating weight as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And load carriage could be an entire episode by itself, being with all the aspects you have to do to be prepared for load carriage and this standing with 20, 30, 40 pounds all day, however long your shifts are, right? So that's a whole nother aspect that people don't, I guess, think too much about because, you know, it's just part of the job, right? But there's a way to also prepare for that in and of itself. So yeah, you're absolutely right. There's certain agencies that you have to be in full kit to pass this test. Some pass it with just shirt and shorts, but some are full kit. So depending on the agency, that may be something you have to understand as well, that you're not just running or pulling something or dragging something with just yourself. You have to do it with extra weight. And the first step of that, as we keep coming back to it, is being able to move your own body very, 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 very well, right? It shouldn't be that when you get up to the stairs, now you're huffing and breathing after one flight. That's not going to bode well for the rest. Because I know there's stuff that's going to come after that stair. I keep talking about the stairs. There's going to be something that
Yeah.
comes after
That's just
that stair.
that's just the beginning, right? Just that approach. That's how you get to the where you get to the point where you get to do something, right? Now there's probably stuff you do before you get there, but you got to do a little bit of stuff. You make it to the stairs. Oh no, now you got to go up the stairs. Now the real action happens after the stairs. And so it's just this aspect of and so I want to highlight what we just talked about, but this really drifts us into this next piece. So we talked about being able to maneuver or manipulate our own body in space, right? Being able to carry ourselves first before we start manipulating objects, talking about building up attributes, building up components of fitness. If you need to improve in strength, you need to improve in endurance, cardiovascular system, whatever it might be, understand what that task is asking of you and then improve those attributes. And then training beyond the test, right? Improve those attributes, continue to improve those attributes. But really what we started talking about, right now, we're drifting to this next section of this discussion is once we're done with the stairs, and we're gonna go back to the stairs because for whatever reason we stuck on the stairs, right? So let's
Stairs
say
be
you're into
getting
we
people.
can it can be from a testing, it can be from a clearing. You got into a building, now you had to go upstairs, right? You kind of might be a little winded, might not, kind of depends on your fitness level, if you're used to this, how your nerves are, CNS, fight or flight, your breathing patterns, right? When you're going through this. But guess what? You got done with the stairs. You need to be recovered from the stairs so you can do the next thing, right? So we're going to drift into this next part talking about understanding recovery. So if you would kind of talk about the aspects of from event to event, it's not necessarily how I recover when I get to lay in bed at night, which is a huge part of recovery, right? Don't get me wrong. But what if you did an event and guess what? More things are asked of you. So, Anthony, if you would kind of talk about that recovery, the between aspect of recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So some tests do have individual events that um, you do one, you rest a little bit, you do another, you rest a little bit, you do another, you rest a little bit. If there's ever a longer sprint into that 1.5 mile, because generally 1.5 miles or 2 mile or however long aerobic event you're doing comes at the end. So you're doing all this stuff prior to it. And by the time you get there, or can you run that with enough, being recovered enough, feeling fresh enough to run this at the normal pace that you've been running at while training for this test, right? I've had certain recruits come up to me and be like, oh, I didn't know I was not going to be ready by the 1.5 mile or by the 2 mile or whatever. That sprint was tough, right? That in between. And I was like, yeah, there's only a certain amount. Some people allow 5 minutes, people allow 8 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever that recovery time is in between to get from going from a sprint, which makes you breathe hard. It's a high intensity bout of energy and a high metabolic strain that you're going to feel. Sometimes some people feel a little, their legs are a little heavy after it, they're breathing hard. Okay, how long is it going to take you to recover? Now you have to run at a slow pace for 8, 10, 12, 15 minutes, however long it takes you to run and however long the distance is. So that transition kind of sucks.
Yeah,
um,
and and not only from a so that's from a within the test, right? Like you have one event, rest a little bit, one event, rest a little bit. And we do the same thing when from a research side, we do a lot of fitness assessments where like you might do your anthropometrics, your measurements, then you'll have a little bit of a small gap, then you'll do your like mobility stuff, your movement patterns, then you'll have a little gap, and then we'll do our like power based testing, a little gap, and then you'll do a physical ability test, you have a little gap, and then like a 1.5 mile run, right? Like that little aspect of and you're right, and it's a huge component if you don't, and sometimes we're not as aware of this, but if you don't recover, let's say after the first thing you're 95% recovered, you go to the next thing, and then you approach the next thing, guess what, you didn't have that 5%, so a little bit of hindrance in the next thing, but you didn't really realize it, right? And then you got done with that and you're at 60, but you managed to recover up to 80. And so then you do the third thing. Guess what? You're approaching the third thing at 80%. And then you get done with that thing and you didn't have 20% to approach it. You used your 80%. You got done with that. You're now at 40. You rested for a couple of minutes, right? And so now you're back at 55, 60, and you're going into your fourth event at 55, 60%. Now you feel it, right? You didn't feel it those first three, and it was slowly trickling down. You weren't able to kind of build that system back up and recover in time. And so now, and then let's say you get to that 1.5 mile and you're approaching the 1.5 mile at 30%. You didn't feel it on the second thing, you didn't feel it on the third thing, but you are slowly ticking down to when it got to that last event. I also challenge the mentality of what if it's not in the test? And I don't know what some experiences you have with, let's say, and there's two things that I have in mind, and then share what experiences you have. But the first one is they're in the classroom doing stuff, right? This is part of police academy where they might be interacting, engaging, doing different types of curriculum within the classroom. That's still taking a toll on them, might not realize. So depending on time of day and structure of when you implement this is huge, but your fatigue level goes down throughout the day, right? Like you're building up fatigue, you're slowly decreasing your energy levels, and you might be building up fatigue specifically in certain parts musculature wise, depending on what you're doing in the classroom. And by the time you get out there to do testing, you're already at 70%. You might not really realize, it might be a little tired. You're like, maybe if I warm up and stretch and drink this energy drink, like I might be good to go. And so you're already at 70% just to start this. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is depending on the amount of time it takes until it's your turn, what are you doing until you're the one that's up? For instance, there might be a class of 30, class of 50, class of 10, whatever it might be. If you're the 30th person and one person goes at a time, what are you doing until it's your turn? Because if you're standing there, even though energy wise it's just enough energy to stabilize and keep you upright, you're still, your knees might start aching, your ankles might start aching depending on what you're wearing, your hips might be a little tight, especially if you don't warm up before you start. So like just that aspect of non-test involvement also plays a huge factor into testing and the recovery aspect to be ready for the test. So I'm just curious
yeah,
your 2 cents on that and experiences.
absolutely. And even going even further, what did you eat that day? How long did you sleep the night before, or the past couple nights before, right? How much water have you drank over that course of that up to that test? So there's so many aspects of recovery that help or hinder your results going further. And then there's another small thing. I know this is a little bit of a digression, but how you train for that test. A lot of people think that the treadmill is the way to go. Do not run your long distance on a treadmill. Once you get on ground, it changes everything. And it's a lot harder. It's a lot more difficult to get this thing done. And it's just going to ache and it's going to suck. So that's
But
another aspect
I
for
can
sure.
run 15 miles on the treadmill. Why can't I run 10 miles on the ground? It's a whole different ballpark.
Yeah, once that belt stops moving, then it's a whole nother thing because now you have to push. The belt's not
Yeah.
moving no more. You have to push through. You have to go. So that changes everything about the run. And then you have to add in the aspect of how much do you care? So how nervous are you coming in place to this? So now you're already at a heightened stage. You're already in fight or flight because you're nervous to take this test. Unless you're super confident, great, good for you. But not everyone's like that. So for those people, that training aspect and that all that recovery and all that other stuff before is so super important because now we are hitting fight or flight earlier. We had it maybe all day. We're stressed out. So there's so many things that come into the recovery aspect of things, as well as not training for the test, but training past the test because you don't know how you're going to feel that day. When you're training, you feel good, especially if you had a good day. You're like, oh, I'm so ready for this. I feel great, and it makes it easier. It makes it feel easier. But that test day comes, things may change a little bit. You may see that person who's running next to you just go a little bit faster than you're going, or maybe you're in front of her. Does like there's so many different things that can come up psychologically, physically, that are not accounted for that change the way that the test is run by the way you train.
I've seen mentality shift, not mentality, well, mentality shift slash I've seen nerves go up and if you're hearing this and then you hearing this, you already know the nerves change when the director walks into the room. Period. Right? Like the nerves change. Let's say not the director, even on the exercise science side, you see someone with a clipboard, nerves change, right? You see someone with a timer, nerves change. Even if you're super confident, it's still, and it might be very minuscule. If it's only 2% of a toll to you, fantastic, right? Like you have that ability to hone in your the just mental strength to be able to really focus and really prioritize just your performance. But for others, that 2% might be a 50, and I usually tie stuff into 50% because it gives good comparators, right? But for someone else, it might be a huge 50% hit. And so now they're like jittery, like you give them instructions and they're like, what did you say? Can you say it again? Right? It's this aspect of nerves. I'll see this a lot of times we usually do a pat we do a pre, we do two mids, and then we do a post. In other academies, other academies I work with, they do a pre and post and a mid. So there's still that first experience. And usually the first experience is that aspect of, all right, are you ready to go? Do you remember what you're supposed to do? Yes. All right, 3, 2, wait. Over there, what was I supposed to do? Yeah. Okay. Well, do we need to walk back through this really quick, right? So that nerves aspect really changes a lot. And so let's drift to our next point. We brushed on this as we were talking through, but how do you prep for this? And this is going to be very generalized. Don't get me wrong, because we could dissect the training plan. We could go through all
Mm-hmm.
different stages and phases of training and so forth. But let's talk about periodizing a training program. What does that mean? And then, and I know in a previous episode, I talked a little bit about progressive overload and stuff. But what does periodizing a program mean? And what are let's just say rules of thumb? What are very basic levels of understanding of how to approach training?
Yeah. So with periodizing or periodization, it's pretty much creating a plan that you adhere to that gets you prepared for the test or for in sports, the upcoming bout, the season, whatever it is, right? So you pretty much backtrack from that spot, from that end date to where you are now and be like, okay, how much time do I have? What do I need to do and get improve upon? And those are the aspects that you kind of continue to progress and progress until you reach that end date and you're trying to peak at that point. So with all these tests, generally they test strength or muscle endurance, kind of go hand in hand. They test some type of anaerobic threshold, So how long can you go at a high intensity? And then they test aerobic threshold. So how long can you run or swim or yeah, those two, pretty much those two things. Or march if you're rucking. So these are all the biggest thing with periodization that people don't truly understand is the rule of specificity. So you have to specifically train for what you're training for. So if you are training muscular strength, you cannot go run, right? If that is your goal,
No way.
train strength. Do strength, lift heavy things, right? And it's also relative. So some people who have a low training age, a push-up may be very difficult, maybe a high intensity for them, right? If you continue to get better at push-ups, you see your push-ups going up from, let's say you started at 3, now you're at 10, now you're at 15, what you are progressing, you are getting stronger. That is a good thing, right? If you move from, as we talked about a little bit earlier, the incline push-up down to flat on the floor, that is progression. That means you're getting stronger. That is a good thing. These are things to look at. It is all in increments. You're not going to get there in one day, and that's okay. No one who's ever started lifting, ever started training, got to where they got to in one day, right? Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson don't look like he did when he 45 years ago. Maybe 20, maybe 15, but it took him a while to get there, right? So that's one major aspect. Specificity, train for what you're training for. So those three things cannot be done or emphasized, better yet, at the same time, right? So you can do all of them in the same week, and then you can change certain things, certain aspects of it, and that's getting more into undulation versus linear. That we don't need that yet, but emphasize, I would say for these tests, emphasize one thing each day and continue to improve on it over the course of however long you need to. So something like,
and it
yeah,
simplifies it for cadets, right? And then you can add your tidbit as well. It simplifies it for, and we're speaking to those that might not have any fitness experience, right? Like you said, focus on one thing. Don't try and add all these things in all at once. Just, okay, you want to work on strength, work on strength. This other day, you want to work on cardiovascular, work on cardiovascular. You want to work on muscular endurance, work on muscular endurance. And like you said, and I'd love to go into another spin on another episode of, all right, we're talking programming. That's a whole nother, and that's like 5,000 episodes of programming. But just kind of that generalized overview, like you said, of specificity. Just figure out what you want to train and then implement that, but go through phases in there.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, and these things don't have to take too long. Like if you only have 30 minutes, that's plenty of time to get a lot done, especially if you emphasize each one each day. So let's say you have 3 days a week to get through all and you have 30 minutes a day. Like that's it. You have 2 jobs you're doing to get ready for whatever it is. If you're extremely busy, you have 30 minutes to do strength one day, 30 minutes to do anaerobic capacity one day, or a bout of, let's say, 5 300-meter dashes, right? Something that's going to be long enough to tax you, but short enough where you can have a high intensity. And then your longer run, just 30 straight minutes of run walking. If you start off and you can only run a certain amount of time, then walk a certain amount, then run and pick it up, that's fine. And understand that continuing to progress up to, I can run straight for 30 minutes. Cool. Now, how far did I go within 30 minutes? And then you can continue to use those little goals to continue to progress yourself. So you don't have to say, all right, I have to run a 2 mile in 10 minutes. Let me try to do that now. Like you may be able to do it. Maybe you're a great athlete back in there. Maybe you're a track guy. But if you're not, don't worry too much about that. Let's try to run for 10 minutes straight first. Then let's try to run for 20 minutes straight, then 30 minutes straight. Okay, now why? And the funny thing is you'll see that as you work anaerobic capacity and aerobic, they kind of work together in the sense that you will start running faster for longer periods of time, right? Now you can't run for a long period and expect to increase your speed. Like that's not going to happen, but they do hone in a little bit and mold a tiny bit together, especially with muscular strength, right? So let's talk about it takes, and I'm going to try to simplify this as much as possible. It takes 300 newtons of force. We're going all the way back to middle school science. 300 newtons of force to take a step, right? And your max that you can produce stepwise is 600 newtons of force. Let's just say that. If you get stronger and now you are doing 800 to 1,000 newtons of force per step, but it takes 300 to take a step at the speed that you need to, it's going to feel easier, right? So muscular strength has a portion of it, anaerobic intensity has a portion of it, and aerobic endurance have a portion all together to work together and get you in quote unquote better shape.
I'll be honest, you simplified that a lot easier than I would have simplified. I would have gone down. I usually go down the rabbit hole of like 1 rep max, and then, you know, if you do 315, 135 feels like this. If you do 405, 135 feels like this. I go down that rabbit hole. So you made it a lot more simple than than I would have. But man, I enjoyed this discussion. And so wrapping things up, and like I said, we're going to tie in and do a lot more discussions like this. And really, we can hone into all of these points and just have a longer discussion per subtopic. But just to highlight, I mean, get good at moving. Get good at being able to manipulate your own body before you even try to manipulate objects. Be able to work on your recovery, whether it's recovery from bout to bout, from day to day, in between testing, in between the testing battery, the individual tests, the individual activities, but then also work on your training. Figure out what works for you, but then really tailor your training toward preparation for the task, preparation for the test, preparation for the attributes, and excel beyond the test. But all of that takes education. All of that takes an understanding. If you don't know how to move, if you don't know what recovery looks like, if you don't know how to write a training program, that's all going to be a hindrance. So allow this platform to be education for you. I beyond appreciate you, Anthony, to be able to join us today. I know we're going to have further discussions, and even after this, we'll go back and forth on, okay, what can we talk about next time? And if y'all have questions, reach out to us. Beyond appreciate you listening in to TAC Team Tune Up. And until next time, if you have questions, like I said, feel free to reach out.